Awesome. Guys, I just want to say it's a real pleasure to be out here joining you guys today. I understand that, this is not easy work, obviously, whether you're a person with lived experience or not, seeing people struggling every day in our society and constantly witnessing it over and over and over again can be extremely challenging in our lives. And so, we have to do things to make sure that we're okay, because I've met a lot of people in my life that are really good at helping others, and they just weren't good enough at helping themselves. And sadly, a lot of people have passed away because of that. A lot of the times, too, you have to reflect on, your own life and what you've gone through, and making sure that you're dealing with your self-care. My story is one of a little bit of luck, a lot of perseverance, and a lot of grace. I got here, under insane circumstances. Medical science would say I'm not supposed to be here. People will say that I'm not supposed to be here, and for some reason, I am. So I'm going to share with you guys my story about overcoming addiction, mental health, and homelessness, and just the ability to, never give up. Even though I didn't even know what I was doing half the time, I always had a desire inside me that I wanted to stop using. I was good at getting sober. I wasn't good at staying sober. And so recovery is rarely possible alone. So we need support. And one of the things we're going to tackle today is just our views and biases and judgments, how we view things in our society. We don't often understand the story, so we judge. And one of the biggest things in our society today is how we view what substance use looks like. What society usually thinks that drug use looks like is, somebody that's homeless or struggling, and, marginalized populations. And yes, sure, that exists, but however, a more accurate picture of people who are struggling with substance use is in the workplace. Constructions and trades industry, it could be your teller at the bank, Safeway clerk, it could just be anybody. It could be your lawyer, your doctor. People use drugs in our society. The reality is people don't talk about it. More people die in our province of British Columbia than car crashes, homicides, and suicides combined. So it's an astronomical amount of lives lost. The leading cause of death in the province of British Columbia between the ages of 10 to 59 is illicit drug toxicity. So as you can see, this is a crisis that's not going away. And in order for us to do anything with it, we have to do bold action and accept the circumstances, even if we are in disagreement with them. It's not about that. It's about the person that's struggling. I've witnessed so much death in my life, and the challenge that I go over and over again is this division between harm reduction and recovery. This is a false narrative. Gone are the days where it was and or, it's both. As you can see, the construction workers have the highest rate of overdose of any employee group in the province of British Columbia. 1/5 of the total deaths in this province were from the constructions and trades industry, and in Ontario, 1/3 of the deaths were constructions and trades industry. There's a big reason behind all this of why people don't talk about it, and that's stigma. Stigma is created through laws and policies that have existed in our society. And if you don't understand where those laws and policies come from, I encourage you to look back at the Opium Act in Vancouver that was created. Opium was a drug that was widely acceptable in the province of British Columbia. It was like alcohol. And what had happened is that Chinese settlers that came to Canada to build the railroad with white folks to enhance our economy smoked opium. White people drank opium back then. And so what had happened is that white people in the province of British Columbia became fearful that Chinese settlers were going to take their jobs, so they devised a plan. How can we stop this? Can you imagine using opium every day and all of a sudden it being banned and outlawed? What they did was they rioted. Powell Street riots happened, outlawed smokable opium, but left the tonic opium for the white people to drink. So that's not born out of healthcare. That's not born that we care about you. That's born out of racism. And so I want you to look back at these laws and policies. Even the Prohibition Act, which was first brought into Canada, is actually to target Indigenous populations. So these racist policies still exist in our society today. It's the undertoning language of why we view things the way we view them, which has created social stigma. That's us, people, public, how we view it. Guess where that falls on? Self-stigma. It's the shame, the pain, and the feeling inside of being worthless and judged by society for our struggles. And so that is the main reason of why people use a loan in our society, and why roughly 7 people will die today alone, somewhere where somebody can't get to them. What if I told you that the pain never started here? It started here. I grew up in a middle-class home in Richmond, BC. I have one dad, mom, brother, sister, nice house, money, wore nice clothes, had toys. My parents were well respected in the community. Looked like everything was perfect from the outside, but inside there was alcoholism, verbal abuse, physical abuse, dysfunctionalism, gambling addiction. As a young kid, I describe my childhood as cloudy with a chance of thunder and lightning. Consistently unpredictable, contingent on my parents' views or moods that day was how my life was going to run. And as a young kid, I walked around the house knowing where the cracks in the floor were at an early age, just like a soldier would navigate a landmine field. That was my life. Can you imagine being 6 years old? My thought process is not to draw any attention to myself. In school, I was called hyper, difficult, and hard to manage. I was often compared to other students. Why can't you learn the way everybody else does? What's wrong with you? I've never heard more than any positive affirmations in my life, but I've always heard this: what is wrong with you? And when you form your mind as a child and a young person, when you grow up in an environment like that, it creates a negative impact on how you view yourself. It developed my anxiety, my depression, my self-hatred, my thoughts of not being on the earth, thought that I would be better off somewhere else. I struggled. Outside of that, when I was getting in trouble at school, the school would contact my family, and it started to bring a lot of attention from what was going on inside to the public eye. So I could get in trouble at school, but guess what? I was going to get beaten at home. The verbal abuse I describe in my life is more crippling than the physical abuse. I'd rather be beaten to a pulp because I can get over that. But the verbal abuse created a language in my head where the voices were so loud, calling me a piece of garbage from the beginning of my life right up until the end. This is how I felt about myself. I looked for ways to distract myself as a child. I played sports. I wasn't the best player on the team, but I remember the coaches always saying is that this guy doesn't quit. So I was a fighter. But honestly, sports is one of those things that's an hour here, an hour there, and then you're kind of wrapped up in your environment and your home life, and you struggle. And so these distractions were helpful. Sometimes we'd come home from a Friday from school and our bags would be packed. My mom would take us over to her mom's place in Victoria. I'd have a little glimmer of hope, but she'd always go back. I started to get resentful, angry, frustrated. I started acting out. I started fighting. I hated my mom. As a young kid, you can't understand why somebody just doesn't move forward. You're being brought back into an environment. And so for me, I had to figure things out for myself. And by the time I was 12 years old, I said that my family was no longer fit to take care of me and that I was going to have to figure this out for myself. I started running away from home, and I found the greatest thing I ever found in the world: street drugs. They took it away. It didn't matter what they were going to say anymore. I couldn't care. It gave me the ability to function through life. Drugs became a reasonable response to unaddressed issues in my life, not being able to cope with things, not understanding how to cope. I call my parents there physically, but emotionally void. No love, no nurturing. Sure, there was good moments, but in the midst of the fleeting good moments, there's memories of the bad outweighs it. And so for me, what I didn't understand at the age of 12 is that the drugs that had saved my life were going to eventually turn into the same drugs that were going to try to end my life. And that is a road that a lot of people struggle with. What I also couldn't figure out was what the drugs were going, the trajectory of my life was going to be like. I got involved with gangs. I got involved with selling drugs. By the time I was 14, I was incarcerated under the Old Offenders Act and sentenced to 1 year in jail. I didn't understand the law enforcement, the gang squad that would come after me for the choices that I made. People would say to me that the gangs were grooming me. Maybe. They probably were. But I'll tell you something, that it felt good to be accepted by somebody. That acceptance is with everybody. If you don't get it somewhere, you're going to look for it. They loved me. They took care of me. I've always had people roll through my life at the right moment, at the right time, and at the right opportunity. It's happened throughout my whole journey. When I was 14 and I was incarcerated, my family came to court and made me a ward of the court. As a 14-year-old kid, you wouldn't understand what that meant. But what I heard in court was that he was uncontrollable, and all the stuff that was happening in the household was because of his acting out in society. You hear that at 14 years old. And when I got to the jail and I was dropped off, I remember the probation officer telling me, well, this means you won't go back home. And I just remember thinking, as sad as that sounds, I wanted to go back home. I could navigate what was going on in that household. It was familiar. As sick as it was, I could figure that out. I knew what to expect. I didn't know what to expect when the door slammed behind the jail, and I had to figure things out. My whole life, I've been trying to figure things out. And I remember the lady, Sandy Gooby, I'll never forget her. She took my hand. I was a small kid. Even the people that were incarcerated said, Sandy, is that your son? She said, no, he's a client. He's going to stay with you. He's like a baby. I got into her office and I started to cry, and I told her I want to go home. She said, that's not possible. I said, I need to go home. I can't be here. Now I have to figure out how to survive being incarcerated at 14. And for me, I did survive. Sadly, jail might have been a safer place for me than anywhere else in the world. I actually enjoyed being in jail. I learned how the structure worked. People were kind to me. People were trying to help me. It felt good. Being a ward of the court after my sentence was up, Sandy said that you're going to this group home in UBC area. I told her I don't want to go. I want to stay here. She said, Guy, you can't. And when I got to the group home, I told her, I'm going to come back. She says, you can't do that either. You can only come through here once. They'll send you to the juvenile detention center. And I cried again, and she reminded me, remember when you got to jail and you were crying because you had to figure it out? You're going to be in a better place. You're going to be able to figure it out. And she was right. I did. The unfortunate thing, what started to happen in those group homes is you're a number. I was only allowed to stay in that program for a year. I was doing well in school. They bounced me around from group home to group home, from foster home to foster home, from school system to school system. And the same unpredictable environment that I grew up with was now the reality again in my life. And I started running away from everything and everyone, and the drugs got harder, the drugs got faster, and I fell into the downtown east side of Vancouver. When I was a kid in the downtown east side of Vancouver, a very intimidating area, the one thing I took comfort in was what I noticed immediately was people were in pain. I could relate to that, even though we may have not talked about it. It was comforting in knowing that I wasn't alone in what I was struggling with. There's beauty there. People don't see it. What we see is the action. We don't understand the story, so we judge. We point fingers at people. It's the reality of our world. We lack the ability to see outside of our own struggles, to care about somebody that's on the street. I was never a social drug user. I didn't need to show up and have drugs so I could socialize. I used drugs to get wasted. I didn't want to feel. And my life became what it was. Rolling around in a 2-block radius in the downtown east side of Vancouver for decades. In and out of jail, in and out of treatment. People always said, "Guy, get off the drugs, your life will get better." I did get off the drugs. My life didn't get better. It got worse. Imagine that. The thing that you've learned to cope with your whole life, somebody trying to take that away from you. Even though it's killing you, you have to give that up. So hard. I've been called it all. I've heard it all. Hopeless, garbage, incorrigible, not capable of change, a loser, a criminal. Put him in jail. I survived the first dueling public health emergencies in British Columbia, which was the HIV/AIDS crisis and the overdose crisis in the 90s, where 1 in 4 had contracted HIV/AIDS in the downtown east side of Vancouver. I survived that. I survived decades of being homeless, sleeping in doorways, storefronts, parkades, under bridges. I survived that. I survived 5 osteomyelitis bone infections, 4 in my left leg and 1 in my back, where I had to relearn how to walk again. I survived that. And in 2012 and 2013, when fentanyl started hitting the streets, I survived 6 overdoses in a 9-month time frame. My last overdose was February 18th, 2013 at the supervised consumption site in the downtown east side of Vancouver. I went in, I used this facility from 2003 to 2013 over 4,000 times, just to get an understanding. Just in that facility is where I use substances. That's not including other places that I use substances. I went in, I used, dead. Took 7 minutes for the nurse to bring me back. Took 10 minutes for me to actually get my thoughts together. And when I looked to the left of me, she was crying. And my first response to her was, "Why the heck are you crying?" Because I care. And I just started to cry. A moment, a human that showed connection and love, and a moment where I was vulnerable. I didn't need anybody to pile on me. I was already piling on myself. Nobody can beat me up like me. And I told her, I don't want to die. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I knew then that I was either going to die in my addiction or I was going to die trying to get the hell out. But oftentimes we judge people for using a supervised consumption site. There's 2 lines. Upstairs, there's a detox floor. On compassionate grounds, they brought me upstairs because they were worried that if I left the facility that I wouldn't be back in the morning. I would die. And so the journey began again. I left the downtown east side of Vancouver with 1 set of clothes on my back and a welfare check. Nothing. Nobody cared. Just just the people who were using the harm reduction services, just the people on this street that told me, you can't do this anymore, dude. I knew that. And I knew the risks. I said to myself, you know what? Whatever happens, happens. And if I don't make it, at least I tried again. And lo and behold, when I got upstairs, things started to change. One of my doctors was Gabor Mate. And what he said to me back then was the first guy to drop a bomb in my life, where he said, can I ask you a question? He wasn't going to tell me what everybody else had told me. He was going to ask me if he could ask me the question. I said, yeah. Are you enjoying doing this? No. He said, Guy, can I tell you something? I said, yeah. I don't believe your problem is the drugs. What? Everybody says my problem's the drugs. He says, there's a reason why you use them the way you do. And somebody dropped a bomb in my life. And he said, tell me about your childhood. And I couldn't even open my mouth. I just started to cry. What's interesting about trauma is that you bury it so far deep that you won't deal with it, look at it. But one thing that happens with trauma in our lives is that eventually, if you don't deal with it, it will impact you negatively. I had suppressed. I had a tough exterior. You don't survive on the street without being tough. Maybe a little ruthless at times. But it wasn't against people. It was, I was more afraid of you, of what you'd think of me. I was a weak soul. And so when you'd see me, you'd cross the street. Or if you tried to talk to me, I got angry at you so you wouldn't come back and talk to me again. Usually the ones that are making people laugh the most are the ones that are dying inside the most. On the street, I was just that guy. But inside, the sadness, the pain, and the struggle. And after that moment, lo and behold, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and I cried again. I've always felt stupid my whole life. I was often compared in schools to, why can't you learn like everybody else? My biggest response was, I don't know. I lack dopamine in my body. I have a dopamine deficiency because of my ADHD, which means that I have to do high-risk behaviors to feel alive. It's not a personal thing. It's a struggle. And being undiagnosed for so long, it broke down how I viewed myself. What that moment did was, you know, when you do a puzzle and you finally find the piece where it all makes sense. Those pieces were now put together. I started going to counseling. This is how harm reduction and recovery works. You guys know what a relay race is? You're on the same team. You pass that baton back and forth as many times as possible. The goal is people. It's to save people's lives no matter what the cost. Do anything, even if you don't agree with it. It's not about you, it's about them. It's about having them show up. And I left the downtown east side. I went to an outpatient program, a run-of-the-mill recovery house, nothing too serious. I'd been to treatment over dozens of times, so, it wasn't a failure every time I went. I always try to reflect that in people's lives, that life is about learning. Make mistakes, learn from them. Discipline is doing the things you hate doing, but doing them like you love them. That's what it takes. And when you're dealing with trauma and pain, it ain't comfortable. And if harm reduction didn't enable me to continue using drugs, I was already using them. Harm reduction enabled me to live. And if it didn't exist, I wouldn't exist, my kids wouldn't exist, this family wouldn't happen. None of this is possible. Harm reduction gave me the ability to figure things out. Recovery has given me the life that I have today. Powerful in that. One of the biggest things that we often overlook in our lives, we think it'll be a prescription pad, or we think it'll be this or that. I'll tell you something, and you all possess it. You as people have it. You have the key. Is that human connection can change the direction of people's lives. It's about you showing up, caring, giving a hug, a smoke, whatever it is. A few bucks. Telling people, I got you, man. Not judging anybody for how they're living. This is what I do. If you ever want my help, you come call me. I'm gonna come help you. And you keep checking back in every so often. Hey, how you doing, man? You know, I can sit down in a back alley in the downtown east side of Vancouver and break bread with people like, don't care. I'll hang out. Let's hang out. I'll hang out in an alley. I did it my whole life. There's something comforting in that. I'm going to share with you guys two of the most powerful stories that I have in my life about human connection and how it truly changed my life. My grandmother never judged me, witnessed everything that's happened in my life, loved me unconditionally. When I fell into the downtown east side of Vancouver, it really limited my contact with her. But every year, twice a year, she got on a Greyhound bus from Victoria, traveled into the downtown east side of Vancouver, usually around my birthday and around Christmas. And she found her grandson. Take me to the spaghetti factory. And she'd tell me, I'd always ask, what does everybody else think? Oh, they just think I'm some crazy old lady coming down to the downtown east side, gonna get robbed. The funny thing is that when she would go into the downtown east side and she couldn't find me, there was people on the street walking with her trying to find their grandson. That didn't look like a robbery in progress. Looked like somebody trying to help their grandmother find her grandson. And she'd always say to people, I just keep telling them they're gonna figure it out. They just think I'm some crazy old lady. And as things got older and time developed, she got, her health kind of deteriorated, but she always sent me a card with money in it to the supervised consumption site. And I'd get the card and I'd open it up and I'd be crying and it meant so much. And she would always give me money when she'd see me and I'd always tell her, it's not necessary. And she goes, no, yeah, it is. She didn't judge me for giving me money. Most people would say, don't give drug users money, they just go buy drugs, but she didn't care. It wasn't about that. It was about showing up. So when I left the downtown east side in 2013, my girlfriend at the time, my wife, became pregnant with our first child in November of that year. My grandmother was also diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and she was moved to palliative care and given 2 weeks to live. You don't really go and announce publicly that there's the early stages of pregnancy, but we thought because she was going to pass in 2 weeks that we would go let her know that she was going to be a great-grandmother. And when we got into that palliative care room and we told her, I can describe the emotion. She was so happy. And I remember her saying, I can't wait to meet my great-grandchild. And I immediately responded, Grandma, that's not possible. I'm not a mathematician, but 9 months, 2 weeks doesn't add up. And she squeezed my hand and said, no, I'm gonna stay. And I just remember looking at her going, okay. So daily, my wife and I showed up at palliative care. 7 o'clock for my grandmother's 2 favorite shows, Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, Black Starbucks coffee. Very competitive. And then a month had passed. And then 2. We just keep showing up. And then 3. And then we found out it was a boy, and we named him Noah, and we raced back with the ultrasound. And she was holding the ultrasound like she was holding him. And she loves the name. She said, Noah's a powerful name, just like you. And then the cancer had spread throughout her body. Anytime now. You go through this roller coaster ride of emotion and life. You keep showing up because you believe, because somebody else believes. 9 months later, I wheeled her out of palliative care, and she held her great-grandson Noah for the first and only time. That's the power of connection. A couple days later, I went back. I could see the physical impacts on cancer and how it had impacted her life. And I told her I wasn't coming back at 7 o'clock anymore. I wasn't coming back. This was goodbye. But I wanted to come back and thank you. Thank you for always showing up in my life. Thank you for never giving up on me. Thank you for believing in me. And she said, I had to stay. I had to make sure that you were going to be okay, Guy. I'm okay, Grandma. Thank you. And a short time later, we had gotten the call that she had passed. My grandmother taught me all those years in the downtown east side was somebody to show up in my life and provide that hope. Was what I was repaying back to her, the same connection, and showing her the journey of a life that was being brought into the world that she wanted to witness at all costs. The will to live in people is so great. Our minds can't even comprehend it. We are a fraction of what possibility can happen. We are tiny. Nothing. 10 years ago, this last Christmas, I was sleeping in this doorway at the West Hotel right across the street, downtown east side. Cold, blanket, wet, soaked. Some random lady walked by, woke me up, gave me a coffee, $50, and kneeled down to give me a hug and said, Merry Christmas, and got up and walked away. I've never seen her again. The gift that she'd given me where people would think it was the $50. It was the hug that somebody saw somebody at their worst moment and was willing to hug them. I never forgot that lady. I don't know where she is. I'd have many questions for her. Why did you stop? Nobody stops. Why did you even care? What made you want to give me money? I don't know. This all boils down to people. It was the short time after that I'd finally gotten the muster inside to go and get it. 10 years ago, I was also on VPD's most wanted list. 2021, I was Vancouver Magazine's top Power 50 list of influential people, and also the Courage to Come Back award recipient. People recover when they're supported. Don't ever give up hope. This is some of the social media stuff that I post my stuff on. Follow along if you wish, know the story. We as people have a gift. And I appreciate everything that you guys do for people. I want you to know what you're doing doesn't change the big picture, doesn't take away all the issues that people are struggling with. But what it does do is in a moment of time, is you take something away. People always remember how you made them feel. You're never going to get another chance at that. Otherwise, you're going to be repairing the relationship as you go along. Don't ever forget that. It'll go a long way, not only in your work that you do now, but in the future later. People will never forget you and the kindness that you gave at a moment when they didn't feel worthy of it. We don't know or understand. And with addiction or substance use or drug use, we don't understand the story behind the person. This is where harm reduction has probably been the most vitalist thing in my life, is because it wasn't judging me for using drugs. It was getting me to open up and start talking about things that I could never talk about. I always support both. And I don't support harm reduction over recovery or recovery over harm reduction. I support helping people. And I understand that this journey is a long one. So I hope this inspires everybody to continue the work that you guys do, but to know that you guys are seriously making a difference in somebody's lives. And I want to thank you personally for that. Thanks for listening.